Okay, so this video is about what God can do for your mind. So I'm not necessarily here to try and prove him to you. You can look at my other stuff or, any go anywhere for that. I'm kind of talking about your psychological and health benefits kind of that come with it to try and just maybe convince you to look into something because I'm going to talk about that. And the greatest purpose is for people who maybe not necessarily believe to have something to latch on to, something material that they can then kind of see, okay, this is a thing that believers have that we don't. Or if you are a believer, this might also just be interesting to watch for you. But yeah, let's get onto it. So what does the belief in God, Shirley, do for you, as in your mind and stuff like that, and for your health? Well, I've broken it down into a few layers and levels of it, but they're not necessarily like the strictest objective truth. It's kind of just my framework that I've come up with. But on its own, straight away, it's already good for you, because even just the acceptance, the first moment of just belief without anything else, right? Just the acceptance that God does exist, believing that he does exist, all along on its own, kind of forces you to stop living in this idea of a world that is pointless or random, that just came about out of nowhere with no end goal, no purpose, right? You're no longer living in a randomly existing world with no discernible purpose, and it also brings in the idea of purpose, because not everything, is pointless anymore. There is actually something behind all this, which is already incredible for your mind. It means that everything you feel and everyone you know does actually have a purpose. All of these things are ultimately now real because there's something behind them. The love you feel towards your family and everything you do, it all ultimately does mean something, which I know I keep circling around this, but you got to really get that through your head, how important that is for your mind. And if you choose to combine that first thing of just belief, just belief that he does exist, which necessitates some sort of meaning and purpose behind all this, combine that with faith, and the positive effect kind of grows exponentially, because by having faith, you've progressed past the stage of just the intellectual acknowledgement. There's just acknowledging that there is this existence and that there is this purpose. You're going past that now, because you're no longer saying I believe God exists. You're now saying you're starting to orientate your daily life around the fact that all of this was created around you, a being with unlimited power and knowledge at the same time, made all this, and he at the same time knows you, who knows who you are by name, and by extension understands everything that you've ever been through and are currently going through. So I think that's a pretty powerful place to be, because you're no longer on your own with all of these problems. You've kind of got some being, God, that that is beyond everything you could possibly, concern about and worry about, right? He understands you. So now you're living with this entity that lets everything exist have some sort of connection with you specifically, which is pretty crazy. Altogether, this is kind of like a life-changing stage, and to go from one to another, it's not such a simple step, obviously, but the fact that you can start kind of outsourcing dealing with your most difficult problems and struggles and pains and whatnot to a being to whom they are minuscule, right? Because of his infinite power and knowledge and whatever. I could go into describing so much and saying the same thing over and over, but because of this, all of these difficult things that you might be going through and problems and challenges in your life, you're no longer on your own, and you can kind of outsource those things. And when you have faith and trust and in God dealing with anything in life, you can kind of deal with whatever it throws at you, right? Because it's pretty, you may lose the feeling of needing to control so much, which is definitely something I have sometimes. But obviously there are things we can't control, and you can either accept that you can't control them and they're up to something or someone, right? And if you accept that there is someone behind all this, someone powerful that does control everything, it kind of releases a massive weight off of your shoulders because, well, it's kind of self-explanatory, I suppose. You no longer have to concern about those things that you don't control if you already did, right? So you can simply just start giving it up to God, which, I don't think I have to explain how powerful that is, but especially when it comes to things that happen to you, outside of your hands entirely, it can be really, really frustrating when you don't, have any hand in this sort of stuff and it affects you big time. But it's really, really good when you don't then feel the pressure of that onto yourself. And at this stage, you also kind of lose your existential fears, as well as many other fears, to get to the point where not all your fears and concerns over the future, like, you can kind of overcome everything like that, and it's much easier to move on, like, just living your life, because you don't concern so much over every little thing that you can and can't do about your current situation and your problem. You can just say a prayer or, talk to God, give it up to him, because you've got an all-powerful being on your side. And, the next stage is that of obedience, where it's a lot harder now, and it's where you start to align your own will with that of God, and this probably necessitates that you pick a religion to follow. And I'm not gonna talk about that necessarily here, but I've got a bias because I am Catholic and whatnot. But this is where it also, living in a relationship with God starts becoming more difficult than it did before, because you've actually got a lot more to do now if you start to try and obey God's will or God's law, for example. But that's not necessarily a bad thing if it's difficult, because everything valuable, that has ever come about has at some point had some sort of difficulty or pain or whatever connected to it at some point or another, right? And to elaborate, you're essentially accepting to take on moral responsibilities. But in a religious context, this comes alongside moral guidance, which I think is pretty powerful, because you're then outsourcing another thing to God. You're outsourcing the need to judge good and bad, which throughout history has been kind of a notoriously difficult thing to do, right? And you're outsourcing it not to just someone or, to some book or something. You're outsourcing it to the ultimate all-knowing power of the whole universe, which is pretty crazy, right? Because it would go without saying that if you can accept he exists, you could also accept that his will is absolute. So it takes away a lot of those things that, where you might believe your course of action is relative or whatnot. And this removes, a lot of ambiguity from your life, since God will become the absolute moral framework, pretty much, put simply. And that's not up to you to judge anymore, right? So that's pretty great. And finally, having faith and obeying specifically Christ, and not just speaking God in general, allows you to be forgiven when you inevitably do wrong, because it is quite difficult to obey God's law. And that's another thing, it's a difficult thing, and there's a likelihood that you'll fail. And once you start accepting, your own moral responsibility, you're going to act a lot better, right? You're probably not going to do as many things that were already harming you. And, we could definitely unpack this a lot more, but this was supposed to be brief. But it, allows you to be forgiven when you do wrong, just by asking for forgiveness, right? Which ultimately is, you really need to think of how powerful that is, because you're being forgiven for a transgression that you committed, because the creator of the whole universe wants to forgive you, because he suffered for your transgressions and your sins already. He's taken that punishment. It's kind of like been paid for you so that you don't have to. And to put this all together, I feel like that's extremely powerful, all these different things that I've said, but especially this final one, because ultimately, it's the best thing you can kind of do for yourself. And I might be speaking with bias, but all these things are true. Like many people have found, like there is a lot of research backing the fact that religious people are a lot happier in general. They concern a lot less, and definitely don't feel so trapped by this world, because they're not really focused on it so much. They're focused on something beyond that, which also, at least in my opinion, is a lot better way to live, because this world is full of shit that you don't really want to have to deal with. And you don't, if you believe in God. I mean, you have to navigate your life properly and whatnot, but you have a way out of all this. You have a way out of all this sin, and a way to the ultimate good, the ultimate love, the ultimate power. And yeah, that's insane to me. That's insane that mere dust like me and you can actually create a connection with such a powerful, such a great being. So, consider what I've outlined here. I know this video has been a bit all over the place, but I kind of just wanted to get these points across. So yeah, if you like this kind of content, then you know what to do. You can check out some of my other stuff, and yeah, have faith and keep going, my friend.